Take your imagination clear back to the beginning of time. They say that at the beginning of time, things were very different. They didn't have days and nights and a nice steady rhythm the way we have them now. Instead, it might be dark for 10 years in a row, and then light for one day. And then it might be dark for 8 long years, and then light for one day. Well, some of the animals were happy with that because they liked the darkness. But some animals were not happy. They preferred the daylight. The rabbit was unhappy because she would feel safer if she could see her enemies creeping up on her. The squirrel didn't like it because the squirrel always wanted to run down a branch to the end and then take a long jump and catch another branch and go running up the second branch. But in the darkness, the squirrel would fall and hit her head almost every time she tried to jump between the branches. And the birds didn't like it. Well, there was one bird that liked it, the owl. But not the rest of the birds, not even the hawk and the eagle, because they could hunt better when it was light out. So one day when the sun happened to be shining, the eagle flew clear up to the sun. And he told the sun that many animals were unhappy. There wasn't enough daylight. The sun said he wanted every animal to be happy. He told Eagle to gather the animals together and to let them talk about it and however they wanted things to be. However much darkness and daylight they wanted, the sun said he would make it that way. Eagle flew down and called the animals together. Each animal stood up and said how he thought things should be arranged. The biggest and strongest animals were the first ones to talk. So first, Bear stood up. Bear said, 10 years of darkness, one day. Some of the animals agreed with Bear, but other animals had different ideas. The skunk said, "No, I think there should be 4 years of darkness and then 2 days." The badger stood up. The badger said, "Oh, why can't it just be dark all the time?" But the rabbit jumped up, and the rabbit said, "No, it should be light all the time." And the bluebird sang, "My children need daylight. My children need daylight." There were a lot of different ideas. The last animal to speak was the frog. Frog had an idea no one else had thought of. The frog stood up, and the frog said, "One day, one night, one day, one night." Right away, most of the animals saw that was the best idea of all. The day and the night should just follow one another like black and white beads along a string. But Bear wasn't going to let that weak little frog tell him how things should be. Bear kept growling, 10 years of darkness, one day. Before long, all the animals were in two groups. The few that agreed with Bear, and then all the rest of them that agreed with Frog. And they couldn't settle the argument. The eagle had to fly back up to the sun and tell the sun that now the animals were in two groups and they couldn't settle their difference. The sun said there was only one thing to do. They should have a contest. Each group should pick an animal to speak for it. And the animal that could say how he wanted things to be the longest without stopping would get things his way. Eagle came down and told the other animals, and right away Bear said he would talk for his group. And he laughed when he heard Frog was going to talk for the other group. Bear thought he could roar so loud you wouldn't even hear the frog. When the time for the contest arrived, Bear went and stood on one bank of the river, and the frog hopped out onto the other riverbank. Bear didn't even wait for the signal to begin. Right away he started growling, 10 years of darkness, one day. And then when the signal came, Frog started, one day, one night, one day, one night. At first you could hardly even hear the frog because Bear was so loud. But Bear isn't used to talking all the time. His throat started getting sore. His voice was growing hoarse. 10 years of darkness, one day. He snuck down to the river and he drank some water. His voice came back again. 10 years of darkness, one day. But his voice didn't come back for long. He started losing it again. And then the next thing you know, Bear's mouth was moving. But there was no sound coming out. But on the other side of the river, Frog was just getting warmed up. One day, one night, one day, one night. Finally, the bear had to admit he had been beaten. He walked away grumbling to himself. But the frog never did stop talking. Even today, if you go outside on a warm evening, you can hear the frog out there by the water. And if you could speak his language, you know what you would hear him saying, don't you? One day, one night, one day, one night. And that's how things have been ever since. There's been a day, followed by a night, and then another day, and then another night. But of course, as you know, when the weather gets cool in the fall of the year, Frog hides under a rock, and he goes to sleep. After the frog has gone to sleep, then Bear starts growling again. 10 years of darkness, one day. The sun can hear Bear. The sun is a little bit frightened of Bear, and the sun starts traveling a little more quickly across the sky each day. That explains why the days get shorter and shorter all through the fall of the year. But then when the really cold weather comes, Bear finds a cave in the mountains and he goes to sleep. After the bear has gone to sleep, the sun starts feeling a little bit braver and travels a little more slowly across the sky each day. That explains why the days get longer and longer all through the late winter and into the spring. And the story explains one more thing. It explains why it is among all the animals, but especially among the people, it's still not the one who's biggest and loudest and strongest who gets things his way. The one who gets things his way is the one who has a good idea and says it over and over and over and won't stop saying it for anything. And that's how you can get things your way too.